Welcome to my house. Well, Dr. Tom, and I have been pastor of First Congregational Church in Langsburg for the last 4 months. Still on staff at Thrive, helping you guys write series and get some good content creation stuff going. But while I'm here full-time, I am revitalizing this church that started in 1864. So it's a very rooted church in this area. It's in Langsburg, just north of East Lansing, and we're having fun. The people are great. We're fitting in really well, and we're starting to build out some new teams, new ministries, revamping spaces, and it's been a ride. We've been having fun, and we got a lot of good stuff planned here for the fall too. So it's been good. I miss Thrive a lot, but I feel like I've landed in the right spot. This is good stuff, and it was really cool seeing you all today because we were filming right in those chairs.
So, Dr. Tom, here we are. We're in week 3 of our Only God series. And so, we've been talking about how do we see God in everyday circumstances. How do we see the everyday miracles that are happening both in our lives and in the lives of the people close to us? So, can you just walk us through a couple minutes? What kind of sparked this as you and Jason were writing the series? What kind of caused you to put these kind of, or to look for these kind of emphases?
Yeah, well, the danger of our faith is to make it so otherworldly that it doesn't do us any good in the present. And we read about these massive miracles in the Old Testament about the sun standing still, and the sea, the Red Sea parting, the fiery furnace that we're talking today. We read about these miracles, and it makes it so otherworldly, and then we never experience something like that in our own lives. Like the amount of times where I've seen a miracle of that proportion in my own life, it's like, I don't think I've ever seen anyone walk on water like Jesus did, or part the Red Sea like Moses did. So it makes it so other that sometimes it makes it feel like faith is for something else, somewhere else, someone else. And for my life, I just need to, say the right things, agree to the right statements, and keep my head down, and not really sure how faith interacts with my everyday life. And so for this Only God series, I wanted to highlight the message behind the miracle, because the miracles in the Old Testament are pretty cool, but what we really wanted to hone in on was what are they trying to say about God? And that's the connection point to your own life.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. That's huge. You had just you introed where we're going today, so we're looking at the story of the fiery furnace, and so I know that's even for those of us who don't have a lot of church experience, we encounter this a lot. We talk about how life gets hard. Sometimes we talk about how we have to go through the fire for hard things, and so the story, Daniel 3, why don't you give us just a couple minutes, catch us up, how do we kind of set this story up in Scripture? What got us to this place? And what's happening here in this story?
Well, this story is found in the Old Testament, and it's late in the Old Testament story, so it predates Jesus and the Gospels and the New Testament. But the people of God, they have been taken into exile in Babylon, and they're no longer sovereign nation, and so then they have to have someone else in charge of them, and it's just not fun for them. So there's all this literature that starts coming out about, well, if God did all these great things in the past, why isn't God doing that now while we're stuck, under the oppression of this foreign government? If God did all these miracles, why isn't God doing it? So all this literature started rising up, and Daniel's one of those. So we have four guys, young guys, they're like teenagers. who are highlighted in the book of Daniel. Obviously Daniel, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Say that 3 times fast.
I might get into trouble if I do. But they had Hebrew names before that. These are their given names that they were given by their oppressors. And so they had to adopt new identities and new names, and these are like the cream of the crop guys that are brought in, and they're like, these guys are the best of the best, so let's use them and involve them in our everyday running of our country. And so they were kind of just put under the thumb, but in a higher position. And at this juncture, the king he was called King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's really inflated with himself. Like, he's got the biggest ego, the biggest head. He's on a power trip like none other, and he is so full of himself that he makes a golden statue of himself, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Wow. So this is monstrous.
That's impressive.
Statue. And now everyone all around, he like has this worship team that he formed, and he's like, when you hear the worship team, break out in song, everyone's got to bow down on their face before the statue and tell how great it is. It's like,
that's a little strange.
That's a little bit strange. Like, this is a total ego trip. Like, there is. And everyone's like, well, the king has all the power. We don't have much choice here, so this is what we do when someone in power is telling us what to do. So the worship team strikes up, and everyone bows down except for these 4 guys. And they're kind of high up in the government, so they get a lot of perks. They get better food, they get better stuff, and they're kind of high up in the government, so that really brought a lot of attention to them. So one of the king's right-hand fellas is like, hey, there's these guys that are not bowing down to your ego. What do we do about it? Because, he also made this rule that whoever doesn't bow down is going to be tossed into a furnace and burned alive. So it's like, he's like, well, I guess we're going to do this thing. So he's like, I'll give you guys one more chance. Worship team's going to start. Y'all bow down to my big golden image. and if not, then, you're dead. So the worship team strikes up, and they're the only ones left standing. So the king gets totally ticked off. He is mad beyond mad. And he orders the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than normal, which in the Hebrew, that 7 is a number of completion. So it's completely hot. It's not just 7 times, but it's like the hottest this thing can get. So he binds these guys, ties them up, and it's so hot that the guards who tossed them in the furnace died because they got too close. So it was just nasty scenario.
That seems fun. I was going to say, that seems like not a good day at work.
Not a good day at work when you're burned alive. So the king's just kind of like, yeah, good, done. Ego wins. And strange enough, they look into the furnace and they see these 3 guys just walking around without being tied up. They're just hanging out in there. And then they see a 4th person. And this 4th person looks like the Son of Man or the Son of God. So, they walk out unscathed, unbound, unburned, and they're kind of like, yeah, see, God saved us. And then the king orders everyone to worship God instead of his golden ego. Yeah. So that's kind of the sum up of the story.
It's for those of you too, if you want to go back and read the story, this is found in Daniel 3. And there's some very profound statements. I think one of the things that always gets me about this story is, when these 3 guys are presented with this option of do we bow to the king or do we face what may come, they shout across the crowd. They say, hey, king, do what you will. Our God may save us, but even if he doesn't, I'm not going to bow. That always blows me away.
Yeah, that's like their speech when they say, even if he doesn't. Like, I'm not sure if I have had that much boldness when I've faced scenario. Like, I step into scenarios that I just like, oh man, there's no way I'm going to be able to overcome this or to step up and really do this. And I'm like, God, you got to show up. No options. And here these guys take it one step further, and they're like, God, we trust that you could show up, but even if we don't, we're still going to hold our own and not bow down to this guy's golden ego. And that's just the amount of faith it took to say those words is just astounding.
Yeah, and just to face that level of really desperation in the story, and say, listen, like, even if this doesn't turn out the way that we think it will, the way that we hope it will, that we trust that God is bigger than what's going on. So,
Yeah.
You've actually had quite a bit of experience with this in your own story. So can you walk us through a little bit of that part of you and your family and what you guys have had to walk through?
Yeah, we've gone through quite a bit, and I've actually found that sharing my story, sometimes it has a reverse effect of what I wanted it to do, because we've been through intense suffering. So if I don't communicate our story about how we have walked through a lot of trial, suffering, and pain, then people are like, well, this guy's just communicating ideas. But then if I communicate like all the stuff we've been through, it's like, oh, we haven't been through anything like that. So this is like, then you're unrelatable on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the short end of it is that we've walked through loss, and we've walked through suffering, and we've walked through tragedy, we've walked through illness, we've walked through poverty, we've walked through just, I guess, an intense amount of suffering, from losing a father suddenly, losing a child, raising especially as a child. That just puts you on the outside naturally. Just so much stuff that it would take our whole time to talk through it.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I've found out through that whole thing is that suffering is relative. The most intense thing I've been through is the most intense thing I've been through, and the most intense thing you've been through is the most intense thing you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes the same amount of grit to step up to whatever you're facing.
Yeah.
So it's not really fair for me to compare my sufferings to like someone like a Nelson Mandela who was locked in prison for years and years and years and came out strong on the other side, and then say, oh, but I've never gone through something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or for me to look down on someone and say, oh, you're just a pesky teenager, you got your heart broken,
Mm-hmm.
just wait, life's going to kick you in the butt later. Suffering is relative, and whatever you've been through, that's the toughest thing, is the toughest thing. And it takes grit to step into it as it's presenting itself to you in any scenario.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So, obviously, like all of us, at some suffering touches our lives in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And, we read throughout Scripture, not just here in Daniel 3, where these guys are faced with this seemingly impossible choice, but throughout Scripture, suffering seems to be just part of the human experience. Why is it, you think, like that? Even in the middle of that, even though we know that it's going to be part of our lives, that when it happens, like a lot of times it's easy to feel like that God has either left us or betrayed us.
Yeah, that's the question. The Bible asks that question and never answers it, and that's the great mystery. People have been asking why good things happen to bad people forever.
Mm-hmm.
The Psalms are just filled with people saying, God, I don't get it. Where are you? What's going on? Mm-hmm. Jesus from the cross, he's singing the martyr psalm, Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is what the Bible asks. But the Bible doesn't ever answer the question and say, here's why, things happen. And it's when we try to answer it that all of a sudden we find these very insufficient answers to take on whatever suffering we're facing. And then it feels like our faith is really small, and either our only option at that point is to pretend that our faith is enough to handle this with the little cliches that we've adopted, or to walk away from it and say, see, I guess my faith isn't equipped to handle this, so I must not have one. When the reality is that our faith is large enough to ask the question and hold it unanswered in a way that brings about something stronger in us and wise, because it's the asking and the holding of the question in the midst of whatever you're going through that is the transforming power. There's only two things powerful enough to really radically transform human beings, and that's great love or great suffering. They're the only things powerful enough to wake us up out of our autopilot, slumbering existence of being so addicted to whatever we're comfortable with. That's the only two things that slap us in the face and say, oh my gosh, here's reality as it is.
Yeah, it seems like those things more than anything shake us up, the reality that like something bigger is happening than just what we can perceive in front of us. Yeah. That God is at work, that he's doing something, even if we can't explain it or understand it or see it clearly. That's huge. That's huge. But you mentioned these cliches. It seems like it's so much easier just like not only for our own lives, but if we see somebody suffering, just be like, hey, like God is with you, or like, hey, like God will get you through it, or just to throw something in the middle of that. But what would it actually look like for us instead of resorting to cliches? Like, what's something we can actually do for people in our lives when they experience these kind of suffering moments?
The most helpful thing that people have done for me when I'm in the midst of something is just offer their presence without trying to fix it. Like, if I come into your scenario and I try to, and you tell me I am walking through, this intense suffering. I lost my parent and I don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden that creates anxiety in me. And so I got to do something with that anxiety. So then I try to fix the problem so that my anxiety is resolved, and it's a self-centered way of trying to help someone out. When really all I'm doing is trying to relieve my own anxiety of you have a problem, and that makes me feel anxious about it. So I love what Henry Nouwen says about hospitality hospitality is offering enough space for people to encounter God in your presence.
That's so good.
And that's like, if we can just sit with people where they're at and not try to fix the problem, and not even try to say cliche, wise, witty things, quote Bible verses, and just say, I'm really sorry that life sucks right now. Whatever I can do, whatever.
That's so good.
Just to be with them wherever they are.
Yeah.
Because that's the reality, is that we're all going to be in a fiery furnace in some way, shape, or form in our life. That's a part of the human experience. It's to be expected. And if we can have those people in our lives that can come and just offer us that space to not be okay for a season, and say, I don't have the capacity to be happy right now.
Yeah.
Or to even offer quick religious answers right now. That is the best gift we can give, is people just, you have the space to feel what you're feeling and to experience what you're experiencing, and I don't have to try and fix it.
That's huge. That's huge. Well, so we know too, as people are as we're watching this, as we're not only for you and I, but for people in Theater One right now, and for people who will then watch this on the internet as we send this out. A lot of us are walking through some intense pain seasons now, some suffering seasons now. And so what advice, what counsel would you give to somebody? We just talked about what to do for somebody else in your life, but what advice would you give to somebody who is actually walking through one of these seasons right now?
Stop trying to be happy. And not that happiness is a bad thing, but so often we pursue happiness to such a degree that it makes us suffer that we don't have it.
Wow.
So we're trying to get something that's constantly out of reach and missing the gift that is today. Suffering is not something that you have to just trudge through in order to get to the happiness that's on the other side. If that's the case, then we're always one step away from being happy. So instead of trying to seek some horizon that never arrives, life is never going to be. You're never going to make enough money, because how much is enough? Just a little bit more.
Exactly.
You're never going to be comfortable enough. You're never going to be successful enough. You're never going to be secure enough. You're never going to have all of that enoughness in place to where you'll say, now I'm good. So if you're constantly looking to the horizon and saying, I'm almost there, I'm almost there, I'm almost there, you're missing life. You're missing life. And suffering is a part of life. So you have to enter into the present day, in the present moment. And the only way that you're ever going to experience any kind of joy or happiness is to look backwards and say, look how far I've come. Even if it's only one step from last year, I made one step. And that's a whole lot more. And that's, instead of looking forward and saying, that horizon just never seems to get here, and yet I'm constantly trying to get to it. When you look backwards, you can say, wow, I'm a lot farther from shore.
That's
than last year. So yeah.
Golly, wow, that's insightful.
If we keep trying to avoid suffering, then that action causes us to suffer, because suffering is a natural part of life.
That's huge. Huge. For someone who may be in the middle of one of these seasons, and they're not sure where to go, like what kind of conversations would you recommend them having to kind of help even identify what might be that like step one?
Step one, find a trusted person that you can be yourself with and say all of the things that need to be said. It's crazy, the Exodus story. We talked about that last week. That God did not act until the Israelites cried out. So that we kind of think of this like that our pain is supposed to be privatized. It's a private matter. It's just me and God. And that's not the biblical story. The biblical story is that we cry out, we vocalize our pain, and then a response comes in. So God, and this is supposed to be narrative. It's not supposed to tell us this is how it works. When you cry out, then this happens. It's just this is the narrative. This is the story of the Exodus that we saw last week, is that when the people cried out, it caught God's attention, and then God enacted and called Moses into action. I mean, it took a long time for them to see Moses show up, but God was moving. So you can't just sit there and quietly suffer and expect things to change. You've got to cry out, and you've got to find the trusted people that you can cry out to. Because when you privatize your faith, then your pain has power over you, because you have not vocalized it. But if you vocalize your pain to a trusted person, then it's like, I am owning my story, I am owning this pain, and then you have power over your pain because you assimilated it and integrated it into your story. And now it's a part of you and your identity. But if you don't do that, if you do not transform your pain in that way, then you privatize, it powers over you, and then you transmit your pain onto other people. When you have that unresolved pain that is not integrated into your story and your life, that is like this constant burr in your side that people come up and bump up against you, and then that pain comes out. And we've all met those people who are mean or abusive or angry or anxious all the time, and their unresolved pain causes them to transmit it on other people, and then we just don't want to be around that person because they're wounding, they're hurtful, they're critical, they're whatever. So if we want to be people that are deeply peaceful, deeply centered, and own our story and have power over our pain, then we've got to learn how to cry out and to give voice, and then integrate that into our story. Like, this is my testimony. I mean, in Revelation it says that there's only two things powerful enough to overcome the evil one, and that's the blood of our Messiah, Jesus Christ, and the testimony of his people. And that's our stories.
That's huge.
So if we don't own our stories, we can't overcome evil.
That's huge. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, Dr. Tom, just leave us with one more message of like hope and encouragement. So yes, like we experience suffering, and suffering, we experience these fiery furnace moments where we've got to encounter like the harsh realities of the world. But what is this all leading us to? What does this help produce in us? Why has God set this up to be part of our experience as people who follow Jesus?
I guess the thing that, when suffering hits us, our first response is, why are you doing this to me, God? And we kind of have this vision of God far off in the clouds and orchestrating everything. And then we quote Romans 8:28, God will work everything out for the good. That's our way of, justifying.
We'll throw another one of those cliches in there.
That's the cliche that we throw out. So that Romans 8:28 is our way of justifying a God who brings suffering into our life. And I had to get over that theology. Like, I do not think that God causes suffering. This world causes suffering. And God entered the human experience in the person of Jesus. We see this in the Daniel story. There's a fourth person walking around in the fiery furnace with them. And then we see it in the person of Jesus. The story of Jesus is that God absolutely empties everything, all power, all knowledge, all everything in the person of Jesus, comes as a helpless infant, has to learn how to walk and talk, and has to grow in knowledge. So God utterly empties everything that God is to enter the human experience. And then in the person of Jesus suffers the human experience with us, tested every way that we are, but did it in a way that overcame suffering. So he walks straight to the cross. This is the pathway that he sets up. And then on the other side of the cross is resurrection. So he turns to the disciples and says, follow me. And the reason that they don't want to follow Jesus is not because, we're going to have to, memorize Bible verses or, sing songs that are kind of weird or cheesy, or we're going to have to be a part of church on a weekly basis. The reason that the disciples were hesitant to follow Jesus was because they knew that it was going to put them on the same road and enter into physical martyrdom. And they didn't want to own that part. And they even rejected it until after the resurrection. And Jesus hung out with them for 40 days to teach them, like, hey guys, look, I walked through my cross and now I'm resurrected. And they still didn't want to do it until Pentecost happens and they are filled with this new passion and fire. So it's not that God is doing this stuff to us and then promises, oh, but by the way, I'll work it all out later. It's that God has entered the human story, the human experience, and suffers alongside of us. Still today, in our stories, God is suffering alongside of us. God is not, the cheerleader on the side saying, you can do it, you can do it. God is taking that yoke, and he says, come onto my yoke. It's easy, it's light, you can do this. And we'll do it together. So God co-suffers with us. God walks through that, our stories with us, walks in the fiery furnace with us. And then the promise is not that we won't walk through the furnace. The promise is that it won't burn us. So when we walk with Christ, you can see that we're unbound, absolutely free. In the midst of suffering. When you release expectations that life has to be comfortable, the freedom that comes in, you can walk around in that fiery furnace and not be tied up. And God is walking with you. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And these guys walked out unscathed, unburned. And everyone said, oh my gosh, they walked through the most intense experience and came out the other side strong. The fourth person didn't come out with them, So that's the part. You have to not look up and say, God, why are you doing this to me? Well, I guess I'll just trust and you'll work it out eventually. You have to understand that God is right in the midst of it, feeling every ounce of the suffering that you feel, and that resurrection is on the other side. Life is always waiting to break in. It's just the problem, the thing that causes the suffering, the feeling of suffering, is not necessarily the experience that we're walking through. It's the fact that life wants to expand and our container is so small. And so that suffering is us moving to those growing edges of our life and expanding and pushing and getting bigger in our souls. And that it happens through great love and great suffering. It's the only thing powerful enough to do that. So if you want to become an expansive individual, you have to step into the present moment with God and endure whatever there is. You don't have to go and look for suffering. It's going to find you. I guess that's a whole big mouthful, but that's the story of the fiery furnace.
Yeah, we're gonna have to process that together, Thrive, because that was wow. Well, guys, I hope you guys have been encouraged by our conversation with Dr. Tom. I know we're a little jealous we don't get to see you as much, but Tom, thanks so much for spending this time with us and for encouraging us and helping us put one of life's most difficult parts into proper perspective. So
that was fun. Thanks for having me. And I miss you guys.
Awesome. Well, hey, we'll see you guys here in a bit. I don't know how we're
Red Beard Patrol.
Redbeard. I was going to say we're back a little bit for one time only. I guess we'll be here till 2.